Assalamu alaikum, guys. Inshallah, you're all well. Welcome to this week's live. So, again, we're going to inshallah, do a Q&A. But before the Q&A, I wanted to share some thoughts on a very, very common topic, something that comes up over and over again, and something that's confusing a lot of people when it comes to science. And that's the question of how and why. And what tends to happen is that some atheists, some naturalists they absolutely love to conflate the two, mix them up, and make them seem like that they're completely interchangeable when that's simply not the case. So I want to address that today, inshallah. Walaikum salam to everyone that's joining. So I want to quickly address that today, and then we can move on to the Q&A, inshallah. So I came across a video of Richard Dawkins earlier today, which was extremely hilarious. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to link the video into the description of this particular live once it goes up on the channel, so you guys can go and watch it yourselves. But it was really, really funny. What was really funny to watch was how Richard Dawkins, in two different events or lectures, one was from his debate with John Lennox, and the other clip was from maybe another event that he did somewhere, where in these two events he takes two totally opposing positions and contradicts himself outright. Now, in the first clip, you see him in the debate with Richard Dawkins. You see Richard Dawkins in the debate with John Lennox, and in his opening remarks, he speaks about why he got involved in science, and he, goes into this whole, my father was a naturalist, I wasn't a naturalist, and therefore I didn't get involved in science because of this. I got involved in science to find the answers to the bigger questions of life, as to why do things exist, etc. Obviously, science doesn't deal with that type of why, which we'll break down in a second. But that's what he says in that debate, that he got involved in science because he was interested in learning about why things exist. Why are they the way they are? And he seems to be alluding quite clearly in that clip to what you call the metaphysical question of why, which is, why do things exist in the first place? Why is there something rather than nothing? That type of question. And in the other clip, what's really funny is that in the other clip, when he's asked about this whole discussion about why and science, where one of the audience members turns around and asks him, referring to another scientist, he says, well, so and so scientist says that, science can never tell you the answer to the why question. What do you have to say in regards to this? And in this clip, he turns around and he says, why should we even ask the why question? He basically, what he does is, when you watch the clip, you'll see is that he completely undermines and ridicules the whole idea of asking those metaphysical questions, the very thing he seemed to allude to in the debate with Lennox. And he says that why should we ask the why question? It's silly to ask the why question, etc., etc. And then he also says, well, if we ask the question as to why birds fly in the sky, we can answer that from the perspective of Darwinian evolution. And here what he's doing is that he's conflating the why and the how. So I thought it was a very funny clip. I'm going to share it. I'm going to put it in the description box for you guys to see. And one of the things it outlines, to start with, and I don't think we need to, in a way, I would concede that this is like beating a dead horse. But one of the things it outlines is that Richard Dawkins is a liar. He is an individual with an agenda. He has had an agenda for many decades to promote his sort of naturalistic, atheistic worldview. And he's using science as if you like, a gob. He's using it as something to push his views. And such clips, when they're seen together side by side, you really see what the guy is up to and what he's doing. So that's one thing, and gives us reasons not to trust people like him. But secondly, it brings up the discussion of the how and why. What's going on here? What does science deal with? Now, it's very simple. Let me put it this way to you guys. And inshallah, after this, you'll never have a problem with understanding the difference between the how and the why and what science deals with and etc. Science is a method that deals with the material physical world. It can only tell us about the things which are apparent and things which we can pick up via our senses, the things we can see, smell, taste, touch, etc. in this material reality. So science deals with those things. science is not, it can never tell us as to why or how those same things came to be in the first place. It can't deal with that question. All it can do is say, look, you know, this here is here, it exists. Now a scientist can come and tell you everything about this little fuzzy thing, right? They can break down the atomic structure, they can tell you the different components, the raw materials, you know, etc., etc. It can tell you all of those things, but it can never tell you why this thing came into existence in the first place. It can never go into that realm. It doesn't. That's beyond the scope of the scientific method. It can't deal with that, right? So science can only tell you about the things that already exist, and it can tell you about the physical properties of those things, the makeup of those things, etc. So when Dawkins in the clip talks about birds flying, sure, science can tell us something about the mechanics of the bird's flight. It can tell us something about, according to its theories, it can tell us something about how this creature came to fly in the first place from a quote unquote evolutionary perspective. But it can't tell you why. It can't tell you why birds fly, the metaphysical question. Therefore, and also by extension, science can't tell you about why things exist in the first place, right? John Lennox in his book, as we're speaking about him, John Lennox in his book, I think is The God's Undertaker, he presents a very interesting analogy which really drives the point home. He says, look, I'll put it in my own words just to uh, just because I can't remember exactly the way he presented it, but I think this will really clarify it for you. He says, look, if you come to my house, right, and you know you see the kettle's boiling, there's a kettle in the kitchen, it's plugged in, it's boiling, right? Now you can ask the question, why is the kettle boiling? Now this why question could be posed in two different ways. There is one type of why question which is to do with the how. It's really the how, not the why. But then there's the other type of why question which is really to do with the why. So the how why question, if you like, is this: why is the kettle boiling? How do you answer in the how why way, or the scientific way? How would a scientist answer it? They'll be like, okay, Lennox, that's a good question. The kettle is plugged into the wall. It's been connected to electricity. Electricity is flowing through the cable. It's entering this coil which is at the bottom of the kettle. So the coil is being heated as the plug is on, and as the coil heats, it heats the water inside the kettle, and that's why the kettle is boiling. So that's one type of why answer, one type of why question that's being addressed. The other type of why is, well, why is the kettle boiling? The simple answer is, well, because I wanted to make a cup of tea. That's why the kettle's boiling, right? So that's a different type of why question. That question, that answer, that why answer right there is beyond the scope of science, right? If the kettle is boiling and a scientist came into the room, he can never tell you the second answer. He can never deal with that second scenario. He can only deal with the first. He can break down the components of the kettle, highlight to you that, you know, it's plugged in, electricity is flowing, coils heating up, water's boiling. Okay, we got it from a scientific empirical perspective. But why it's boiling? Well, because the person that switched it on wanted a cup of tea. And all that is a question beyond the scientific scope. Now, let me give you another example as we're on this topic, just quickly, and I think this will really push the point home. Imagine for a second that, you know, your uncle is leaving the country for a few months, and because he loves you so much, he makes you a cake, your uncle or your auntie, whatever the case is, right? They bake you a cake, and they leave the cake on the dining table, and they leave, right? Because they have to catch the flight. You come home, and you walk in through the door, and you see that on the table that there is a really beautiful chocolate cake that's sitting on the table. You're very happy, you're really pleased, and you see that there's also a little note next to the chocolate cake. You open the letter, the note, and you read it, and it says, from your uncle, with love, I will see you in a couple of months. You take the letter and you put the letter in your pocket. Now, recently, you've gotten into science. You've really started studying science, and you've been doing loads of labs and stuff like this. So what you decide to do, instead of eating the cake, you decide to take the cake to a lab in your school, your lab at your school. You take the cake and you hand it over to your chief scientist in the lab, and you ask the scientist, look, tell me everything you can about this cake. Tell me everything you can, right? Now, the scientist says, fine, takes the cake off you. A few weeks later, he sends you the results via email. Now, you open up the results, and on that email, what you would see, he'll be able to tell you how many calories were in the cake. He'll be able to tell you what temperature the cake was baked at. He'll be able to tell you what are the raw ingredients of the cake. He'll be able to maybe even tell you, you know, how old those ingredients are, etc., 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 the weight of the cake, all of these details, right? But can that scientist ever, no matter how long you give that scientist, can that scientist ever tell you why that cake was baked? Who baked the cake and why they baked that cake? Can they give you that answer? The answer is no. No matter how much time you give him, that is information which is in the ghaib, it's in the unseen for that scientist, for science. They can never access the information. That information is with you on a little card that you have, the little letter your uncle left you, which is that he loves you and that's why he baked you the cake, right? So why the cake exists in the first place is beyond the scope of science. How the cake is made up and what are the components of the cake, yeah, that's a question for science, right? So there is the why, which is the how, the breakdown of the cake, and then there's the why, which is the metaphysical question, which is why does the cake exist in the first place. Science deals with the how question. Let's call it the how, let's not call it the why, let's remove the confusion. Science deals with the how, not the why. Okay, now just because, now this is the key point here, this is where the naturalists really feel, really feel like they're being stabbed, or they feel a bit of a pinch, they really dislike when you mention this to them. Just because science, this method, cannot deal with the why question, it doesn't logically follow that there is no answer to the why question, or that asking the why question is a silly thing to do, a silly idea. Sure, according to a naturalist or a materialist, it would be, because they want you to believe science is the only way to truth, and everything there is to know about, science can tell you about that thing. Hence, they really get agitated with this type of scenario, like Richard Dawkins does in the clip, which I'm definitely going to link in the description. Hopefully, I remember to do that. So that they don't like, right? But just because science can't deal with the why, it doesn't mean that there is no answer to the why, right? So very important to clarify this so we understand this, brothers and sisters. Hopefully, that's clear. Is that science deals with the how, it doesn't deal with the why. Science can tell you about give you a breakdown of the atmosphere of Venus or Mars, but it can never tell you why that came to be in the first place. That's beyond the scope of science, right? So that's that. Wanted to clarify that. Now, within this context, once you listen to this and you watch the video clip of Richard Dawkins, you'll really see, what's really shocking about his views. Anyway, that being that, let's go into Q&A, brothers and sisters, inshallah. Any questions you have, please do ask. Related to what we've discussed today, or anything else related to the da'wah, inshallah, we will try to answer those. Walaikum salam to everyone that's joined, by the way. May Allah bless you guys for joining. Okay, let's see. So brother Riaz Alim has asked the question. He asked the question before we even started the live stream. So if you're still around, bro, jazakallah khair for waiting around. He said, "Assalamu alaikum, brother Imran, you talk about the ultimate purpose. What if somebody says that it doesn't make any difference whether you're living with or without any ultimate purpose of life, i.e. akhirah?" Okay, sure. You will get atheists that turn around and they'll say, some would at least turn around and say that, fine, there is no ultimate purpose to life, but so what? I'm living my life, I'm having fun, I'm enjoying myself. Well, in such scenarios, there's two things you could do. If they turn around and say, so what? I've given myself a purpose. My purpose is to do X, Y, and Z. Well, you can point out to them, fine, you want to make up purpose for yourself, you want to lie to yourselves, go ahead, do that, no problem. And if you're happy with that, then all power to you. But the reality is, as human beings, I mean, you can mention this to them as well, but the reality is, as human beings, we don't like to be lied to, and we especially don't like lying to ourselves. And essentially what you're doing is, when you make up purpose for yourself, and you say, this is the purpose of my life, you're lying to yourself, because you've just acknowledged and you understand that on atheism or naturalism, there is no ultimate purpose to your life. If you want to say, I've given myself this purpose, this goal, that's fine. We're goal-driven machines anyway. We are creatures that are driven by meaning. We can't help but set goals and want to, and have this desire to achieve them. It's built into us. This is a part of our nature. So they're going to do this anyway. So if someone is okay with that, and they are happy living in a way where they set themselves small goals in their life and achieve them, and they're happy with this, and at the same time are happy with not having the answer to the most fundamental questions of life as to why they exist in the first place, well, then it's fine. You can't do anything about that. You try, right? Our objective is to try and clarify things for them and give them da'wah, and this is a means of giving them da'wah. If they don't listen, then they don't listen. And Allah guides who He wills. Some people, if they truly are okay with this, then you leave them to be. You can't do much more. As long as you highlight to them and outline to them the problems with such an outlook and how it's not natural. It goes against your very nature as a human being. So yeah, that's how you'll get the other type of person who will say, well, yeah, I know there's no purpose to life. I don't care. I don't want a purpose. I just want to have fun. I just want to enjoy myself. This is what you would see. It'll be a type of hedonism, which is, you live in a way just to satisfy your immediate desires and the things you want to enjoy. You're just a pleasure seeker, basically. Well, then if they want to live like this and they want to live no different from other animals, and they want to, remove all of those elements or put aside all of those things that make them a human being, well, then let them. What else can you do? You can just remind them of this. And it's sad, but you would see this within the world that we live in, the society that we live in. There are people out there, loads of people out there today that are more than happy to live this way. They're more than happy to just, say there is no meaning or purpose to life. I don't care. As long as I'm having fun, as long as I'm enjoying myself, as long as my desires are being fulfilled, I couldn't care less. And you just leave these people be, But what's interesting is, these people, what it takes for such people is a stark reminder. When all of those things that they're enjoying are taken away from them, where do they go from there? They've got nowhere to go. And that's when they really feel it. And if that doesn't happen in their lifetimes, well, then they can rest assured that their life is going to come to an end very soon one day. That's true for every single human being. So what they're going to do then? They have to leave all their pleasures behind. And that's not a comfortable thought if you think about it. So you can share those things with them, bro. And at the end of the day, all we can do, all our objective is, brothers and sisters, is to try and warn people and try and aid in their guidance in whichever way, shape, or form we can, by the leave of Allah. That's what we can do. If they're not going to listen, they're not going to listen. We have people of reason, Johnny Mullah, a dear friend of mine, brother Johnny, mashallah, he's online as well. So bro Johnny, if you have any questions, brother, please do ask, inshallah. If you want to join the live, let me know, and I will send you a link, inshallah. Although I don't have, I've still got 40 minutes, bro. So if you want to join, please let me know, inshallah. Okay, let's see. Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullah to everyone that's joining. Okay, so here's an interesting question about Israel. I think it's Israel. That's how you say Mukhti Dinov. I think that's how you say name, brother. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. He says, Assalamu alaikum, brother. How are you doing? How you doing? Alhamdulillah, I'm good, bro. Jazakallah khair. What is your biggest argument against Christianity? I found your channel 2 days ago, and you are doing a great job, alhamdulillah. Okay, Jazakallah khair, bro. So, to be honest, I haven't done many videos on Christianity, although I probably should, inshallah, because Christianity is still quite prevalent in certain parts of the world. But look, my biggest, I wouldn't say argument. If you noticed, one thing you'll notice on my channel, and all of you guys that are following it, that I'm not really big on, I don't like taking the argument route, even with atheists, right? Here's a deductive argument, here is a logical argument. Although we have some very powerful arguments for Islam and against atheism, I personally don't like going into those too much myself. And my personal reasons are because I think we can highlight the flawed nature of atheism even without having to do that, and we can highlight the strength of Islam even without having to do that. These things are quite evident for those that want to see and understand. In regards to Christianity, one of the things I like to point out to Christians is go straight to the foundations. Me personally, I don't like to. I wouldn't say, and I wouldn't advise going into textually, meaning going into the text and using the Bible to have a debate with Christians. I think the best thing to do is, number one, highlight that the Bible that you have today has been changed. You don't have the originals. You don't have the original Gospels. The Gospels, even, I mean, a good reference point is Bar Ehrman. His books, I am actually in the process of, I need to start reading 2 of the books I have from him. One of them I've started, but the other one is called Misquoting Jesus, which is a very good book. And the second one is called How Jesus Became God. These are brilliant books. How Jesus Became God, I've read parts of before, but I want to read it fully. What I've read of it, it's phenomenal. And he highlights how how the Bible was changed, how it changed over time, what we have as far as the Gospels are concerned, what we refer to as Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, how they were canonized, the reasons for the canonization, what happened to the other Gospels, how the scribes edited, changed, wrote into those Gospels over time. What was the objective of the Gospel writers? He shows the disparity between the earlier Gospels such as Mark and the later Gospels such as John, etc. And he shows how the ideas developed of even the character of Jesus, from being a sort of Masonic figure, a prophet figure, who then in the later Gospels emerges as a divine being. or part divine being. So his work is phenomenal on this. But what I personally like to do is just highlight, look, the Gospels you have today, the Bible you have today is not the original. You don't even have the full copies of the originals, and there are disparities amongst the Gospels within between each other. So your beliefs are based on these Gospels. Your doctrine of the Trinity and all of these other ideas that you have are based on these Gospels. If the Gospels have been changed and you don't have the originals, then how can we trust what they say? That's the simple argument I take. That's one approach. The second approach I like to do is what I refer to as the Quranic approach, which is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses the Christians. One way is where Allah, when Allah says, "Oh, people of the book, come to a common word between us and you." So I'm being, I don't remember the Arabic, subhanAllah. But where Allah says, come to a common word between us and you. And the word in Arabic signifies something that's, one of the things it signifies is that it's something of what's most significant and what's most important. Let's agree upon that first. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stipulates those things. For example, that we worship none but Allah, that we associate no partners with Him, and that we don't take each other as lords. This is a very powerful way, a very simple way of giving dawah to Christians. Just speak to them about the Trinity. Even before you talk about the Trinity, give them Tawheed. Highlight what we understand by Tawheed, the oneness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That we don't break Allah into parts or bits. Allah is uniquely one. There is no triune Godhead. And then you can also go into sort of and again, you have to be careful with this, brothers and sisters, because remember, dawah is not just about sharing an argument or being very articulate with your points. It's also having the emotional intelligence to understand your audience, because you have to remember and you have to respect this. Christians, the Christian you may be speaking to has had maybe several years, if not a lifetime, spent as a Christian. They've developed a relationship with these doctrines, a relationship with the idea of Christianity, a relationship with the idea of Jesus being the Son of God, etc. Even though you may understand it's illogical, it doesn't make sense, etc., all of these things, right? You may have proofs for this, but you have to take into consideration that they have a relationship with these concepts. If you attack them ruthlessly, you're going to close that person's heart. And if the person's heart is closed, they're not going to be willing to listen to what you have to say. You're going to end the dawah, basically. It's just going to become a battle of the wits. That's it. It's you against them. You don't want that scenario. That's not what the dawah is about. You have to win the hearts and minds of people. And considering this, the first approach I would say is, before you even ever think about going into the Bible or highlighting that it's not preserved, or that there's contradictions, or that there's problems with the idea of the Trinity, before you do any of this, just go and share what you know about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with them. Give them Tawheed. Just give them Tawheed. Once you've done this, if you still feel there's a need for them, to understand, the problems with the Gospels, etc., then in the nicest and subtlest way possible, and this is giving them respect, referring to their own scholars, highlight to them what the problems are with the Gospels, etc. That's how I would approach Christians. Although I know I've gone off on a bit of a tangent, because the question was about what's my best argument, but I think it was important to mention this, that whenever you're giving dawah to people, having the knowledge, information, arguments is one thing, but that's, I would say that's, it's hard to put a percentage on it, but I would say it's definitely less than 50% of what you need to be focused on. A majority of what you need to focus on is your emotional intelligence. Your ability to understand the person you're speaking to, your ability to speak to them in a way where you don't upset them and offend them and close them off. It's very, very important from a dawah perspective, and something that's completely neglected in many cases. So definitely keep that in mind. And to dawah to anyone, whoever you're speaking to, consider the sensitivities of the situation, of their tradition. Consider, is there any sort of historical conflict between Islam and their way of life? How to manage that in your conversation. Consider that specific individual's personality, their particular demeanor and how they come across. And this could be done by speaking to them, just having a ice-breaking conversation before you even get into the dawah itself. So consider these things in your dawah, brothers and sisters, inshallah. Okay. So I'm not even gonna say. Forgive me, brother or sister, for not saying your name, because I don't want to butcher it. But FG is the surname, or the second part of the name says, I never can get past atheist thought of universe existing from nothing? Yeah, because it's a very sort of unintuitive, irrational way of looking at things. Because it just makes sense that if something came into existence, it must have come from something or someone. There has to be a cause. If you say the universe came from nothing, well, that doesn't make any sense. Nothing in and of itself, because nothing is nothing. Out of nothing, nothing comes. If you say the universe created itself or made itself, well, that doesn't make sense, because for you to create yourself, you have to already exist. Again, it's because most atheists just wouldn't like to go into this area. To be honest, they don't like to sort of even make that argument, unless it's someone like Lawrence Krauss, who has the how would you say, the audacity to write a book, and the confidence, which you have to commend him on, to write a book called A Universe from Nothing, and then to redefine nothing, and then to say the universe came from that thing, which is something now. But yeah, most atheists, I don't think, would say that. Okay, let's move on. Okay. I mean, to all of your du'as. Walaikum salam to everyone that's joined. Okay. So Brother Muhammad Hadib mentions or says, it's like the hard problem of consciousness. Sure, the neuroscience, you can track all the neurons, firings, etc. What you can never account for is the inner subjective experience of each individual. Yeah, absolutely. It's like Hamza mentions in his book, The Divine Reality. There's a whole chapter on this as well. And it's a good example. It's like, science can tell you about how the neurons are firing and what it may even look like in some sort of digital map, and how they're triggered and why they're triggered and how they're triggered in different ways according to different situations. But it can never tell you, science can never tell you about that first person conscious experience of an individual experiencing something. That's beyond the scope of science. Absolutely. It's a good example. It's a different type of, it highlights it from a different perspective. Okay. Okay, I'm just sorry. I'm just going through your questions. I'm just trying to figure out which one's a question and which one's a statement. Okay, something about depression. Where's it gone? Okay. Brandon says, how to cure depression. I get depressed at random moments, and it's sad. Okay, so look, firstly, let me just put a disclaimer out there. I'm not a counselor or a psychologist. So if you have an issue with depression or anxiety, these in many cases can be genuine neurological issues or problems, which are to do with the physical brain. Let's just put it that way. Um, and chemical imbalances in the brain. So for that, it's always good to get professional help, because we should, as Muslims, seek out medicine whenever we can and cures for things. But sometimes there are some types of depressions, which again may indirectly cause changes in your neurology. But putting that aside, there are some types of depressions which are existential, or anxiety conditions which are existential in nature. For those, the solution is very simple. It's to really come to terms with the reality of your existence and the reality of the world that we exist in. Once you get these two things on point and you understand these properly, those go away. Those will go away, because those anxieties and depressions emerge because we don't have these things figured out. We don't have answers to these two extremely crucial and fundamental aspects of our thought and questions that emerge in the human mind, which is, what is the reality of my existence? Who am I? Why am I? Why am I here? What's it all about? And what's the reality of this world I've been placed in? What's the nature of this world? How am I to make sense of this? When you figure these two things out, everything else, those types of existential, quote unquote, existential anxiety and depression would disappear, inshallah. I had that myself for several years, and that was the solution to it. It really depends on what's causing you anxiety and depression. So that's all I'd say in regards to that, inshallah. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cure all of us and keep us all healthy and happy and away from depression and anxiety, all types of depression, anxiety. Okay. Okay, so Muhammad Hadib says, agree about the difference between existential depression, such as results from nihilism, or certain ways of thinking which result in nihilism, which can cause a lot of anxiety and depression. So Tom says therapy is proven to be effective, but like I said before, not absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It really depends on what the cause of your, one's uh, depression is. See, you have to look at it's no different. It's always very similar to physical conditions. You may have certain symptoms which may be arising from some underlying conditions. You can treat the symptoms, but that's not going to get rid of them. And until and unless you find what that root cause is, and then address or provide the right course of medication and therapy, whatever it may be. In the same way, what depression and anxiety are states which arise for many different reasons. You have to try to get to the bottom of why it's arisen, in your case, and then seek out. And this is why it's really good always to seek out medical help whenever you can, and at least as a starting point, inshallah. Okay, so any other questions you guys have, please let me know, inshallah. MashaAllah, Muhammad Adib shared a very beautiful point. The Prophet ﷺ said, for every disease, there is a cure. So search for the cure. Absolutely. Okay, I'm not sure there's a question. Islam, I think I don't have enough knowledge, but the amount of negativity is crazy, and I want to stand against it. What should I do? I don't know if this is a question relating to in relation to atheists and dawah. Please clarify, bro, if you can, and then I can give you an answer, or try to at least. Okay, mashallah, there's some other conversations going on as well, which is good always, as long as you keep it civil, guys, inshallah. My stance on perennialism. Okay, I think it's flawed. I think it's wrong. The idea that there are, well, it depends on where you apply it, but if you look at it from a religious perspective, the idea that there are many ways to God and to salvation, and you can extend this out or restrict it. Yeah, from an Islamic perspective, is incorrect. We know Allah. There was a reason Allah sent the final revelation. There was a reason why Allah said that He's perfected this way of life for us. There was a reason Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent the final messenger, Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So this is the way Allah chose for us, and it's His prerogative. It's God's choice. It's Allah's choice to choose the way He chooses for us. Although we live in times where people would like to believe and push the idea that there's many routes to salvation and many routes to God, and again, it ties into the environment that we're a part of, which pushes the idea of individualism and promotes the idea of individualism, and that you see we live in times where people, I don't know how to put it. It's like we live in times where there's people think that they're God themselves. We as well, we tend to fall into this trap. We think we're independent and we know what's best, and we choose our way, we choose our life, the way we choose to live, what's right, what's wrong. You make your own truth. This is the postmodern reality that we're a part of, right? It's all subjective. It's whichever way you want to see it. And hence perennialism in such an environment is a very sort of appealing and alluring type of prospect, because again, it gives you the freedom to do as you choose as far as your religion is concerned, or your way to God is concerned. But just because something is appealing, it doesn't mean it's true. So people need to understand this. And from an Islamic perspective, Allah has given us a very clear way to Him now. This is His final way, and it's beautifully laid out for us till the Day of Judgment. And if we follow it, we'll be successful, inshallah. It's a very beautiful point by Aftab. I'll just put it up on the screen. Okay, I think some of you guys, mashallah, in some sort of a bit of a discussion. I think there's maybe some non-Muslims on the live as well. So if you're a non-Muslim, please do ask any questions if you have any questions. And I'm sure there's loads of brothers and sisters on the chat section to sort of help you out as well, God willing. Okay, guys. So any other last questions, and we'll wrap up then, inshallah. Okay, some people say that the eternal life doesn't make sense since human nature is we cannot live forever in the world, and we will get bored of whatever your thought. What are your thoughts? Well, yeah, because this is something some atheists bring up as well, which is they say, look, this whole idea of the eternity, I don't want to be in an eternity. I think Dawkins says himself, I don't want to live forever because I'll get bored, I'll get fed up, And also another angle they'll take is also sometimes they'll say, well, and also the eternal, and this idea of an eternal life takes away from this life, because if it's going to go on forever, then it's just becomes meaningless and pointless, right? But what happens is when they're setting such views, there are some assumptions that they're making. One of the assumptions they're making is that the eternal life, the next life, is going to be exactly the same as this life. And just like we get bored in this world with certain things, we'll get bored in the hereafter, especially if we have a lot of time. And it's simply not true. And Islam clarifies this for us, right? That when we go to the other side, you're never going to be bored. You will always have things to do, and things will always be. It's going to be a totally different world. It's not going to be like this world from that perspective. There will be similarities. Things may look similar in some cases, such as when Allah mentions fruits in the Quran, that they will have a resemblance of something we saw in this world, but they will be totally different in other ways. In the taste, they'll be totally different, etc. So you won't get bored. You will always have something new to do. You will always be engaged, and you will have a totally different way of looking at things when you're there. It will be a totally different reality when you're on the other side. That's one thing. And the second thing is the other assumption is when they say that, well, if life carries on forever, then what's the point of being in this world, right? Because it becomes meaningless if it's forever. You just have forever to do whatever you want. It all becomes pointless. Well, again, the problem here is that what they fail to realize is that the life that's coming is not just it's not a continuation of this life. It's a result of this life, meaning what you do in this life will result in where you end up in the hereafter, right? So this life becomes even more meaningful and even more significant when you understand what this life is about. So this life, like we understand it as Muslims, is a springboard, if you like. It's an opportunity for us to attain our afterlife, our akhirah, right? Hence, what you do in this life becomes even more significant and meaningful, because now you have to make sure you make the most of it. Because if you don't, you are at the risk of losing your hereafter, right? So there are these assumptions that they make which are flawed from the Islamic perspective anyway. From the Islamic perspective, number one, the life to come is not going to be like the life in this world, right? Hence, you won't get bored and fed up, etc. And number two, this life doesn't become meaningless. It becomes even more meaningful, because this life determines what you do in this life determines what happens in the hereafter. So that's how I would address that particular point. Okay, we'll take this as one of the last questions. Brother Mustafa says, brother Imran, is atheism natural? No, absolutely not. I mean, you can, anyone that has experienced atheism or has been an atheist in their previous life, ask them, speak to them. They'll tell you. It goes against everything it means to be a human being. Because for one, it strips you from those things that make you a human. You can't account for morality anymore. You can't account for the meaning of life anymore. You can't make sense of, all of the traits and aspects and the things that make you a human being and that separate you from other animals. There's no account for them. Although, and the biggest contradiction is you see it within atheists. They will on one end say they're an atheist, on the other end they will say they're humanist. Reconcile those two for me. I would love to see how an atheist would like reconcile those two realities. How can you claim to be have humanist principles and have these ethical principles and these sort of value principles which just cannot be accounted for, justified in atheism in any way, shape, or form? And the fact that atheists have to be humanists or inclined towards humanism is a sign that atheism is unnatural. It doesn't make sense. It can't account for much. So it's very unnatural. Very, very unnatural. Okay. So let's take this as the last question, inshallah. Brother Muhammad Haris, he says, what if Jesus is God and he is testing us with Islam and Prophet Muhammad? Please clear my doubts. Okay, Brother Muhammad, I want you to think about it in this way. Yeah, I'm gonna give you concepts here. We can extend your idea out to what some Christians would say as well. They will turn around and say, well, look, what about if Satan is actually, God or the author of the Quran, but he wants to, he's just not letting us know that. He never let the Prophet know this, and he was acting like, God and acting like Angel Gabriel and delivering this message to the Prophet. You can extend this out in 101 ways, right? But the simplest answer to all of these ways you can extend it out is this: read the Quran. What does the Quran say? If the author of the Quran was anyone or anything other than Allah, then wouldn't they want that to be known? Because that's the purpose of revelation, right? Why would they promote the idea of one God and that we should worship only one God? Why would any other thing or being, if it was even possible, which is impossible, when you read the Quran, you understand the miracles of the Quran, this is impossible, but hypothetically, if we would entertain it, why would any other being, if the case was that any other being revealed the Quran, represent itself as another being and tell you to worship that being? It makes no sense, right? If it was Shaitan, why would he tell you to protect yourselves against him, right? So all of these ideas fall short. The key is to read the Quran and understand the Quran. When you do this, all of these doubts will disappear. Because logically you'll see the problems with it, claiming that this was from someone else, acting like Allah, etc., etc. Now, if you going into the question of Prophet or the Prophet, peace be upon him, I'll probably do another live stream next week on this, as to the claim of the Prophet, peace be upon him, and how it's ridiculous to deny the Prophet, peace be upon him, as a historical individual figure that existed in history and someone that said what he said and what we have from his authentic sayings. We'll address that in next week's live stream, inshallah. Okay, Jazakallah khair, guys. May Allah bless you. We'll wrap up here, inshallah. And we'll do another live next week, maybe on Wednesday or Thursday, inshallah. May Allah bless you for joining. I hope this was beneficial. Let me know if you have any other questions or thoughts or anything else. Please put it in the question section below, and I will speak to you guys next.